So the square tubing I ordered to make these frame rails finally came in. So I can start installing that, but first I have to remove this center section. And in order to do that, I have to first remove these cross members and these torsion bars. And while I'm at it, I might as well start stripping down the front end.
This still has the transaxle in it, and I'm gonna have to remove that transaxle because the grill shell is gonna go right where that is. In fact, these engine mounts are gonna have to be removed too, because that's right where I want to put my radiator shell. So those are the first things that have to go. Then I can start cutting this thing up.
So those tricky little engineers over at Chevy decided when they put this transaxle in to hide a bolt right behind this A-arm. Fortunately, they made an access hole for you to get to it. Then after wrestling this thing like an alligator for about 30 minutes, it finally came out. And after removing these motor mounts, it was time to bust out the old plasma cutter to finish them off. Okay, so now before I cut off the middle section of the frame, I need to brace this front end. And here you can see on the bottom this brace I'm going to use. It's on the garage floor, and again, my garage floor is perfectly level. So the right way to do this would be to have a frame table where you could weld these rails to so they don't move as you're doing all these modifications. But if you've got a perfectly level garage floor like I do, as well as enough squares and levels and tape measures and a degree in advanced mathematical engineering, you can get this done on your garage floor as well. So I'm using the old cross member I used for that middle section as sort of a square. Since I know it's a straight edge, I can square up the ends of these frame rails. You just have to measure, check for square, measure again, check for square again, tack weld, check for square again, check for level, measure again, check for square again. And after measuring these frame rail mounts for 8 inches, I can weld them to these frame rails. As you can see, we're exactly on 8 inches. I'll tack those in place, check for square, tack them in place, check for square again.
There's more to this life than meets the eye.
So I'm going to check to make sure it's level at the rear of these frame rails. And then here I have the level in front of that mount, about midway up these frame rails. And then here at the front of these frame rails, you can see we're perfectly level as well.
There's more to me than you think there is.
Double check my measurement, make sure we're 40 1/4, and you can see it's exactly right on. And then I'll measure in front of this brace to make sure, and again, exactly 40 1/4. So now I need to cut the down part of the Z, and I know if these are 2x4 square tubing, should be right about 12 inches from the ground to the top of the tube. So just double checking that measurement, and then I'll use my scribe to mark out 12 inches in 2 separate spots, and use my straight edge to draw the line, and that's where I'm gonna cut. So I ran into a little bit of an issue. This passenger side over here is just a little bit off. It's not quite square to the ground. You can see the bottom of that frame rail that I cut down for the Z, the down part of it is kicked out a little too far. So I have to break these tack welds and move it back in and re-square it. I should have done that when I tacked it in the first place, but this driver's side over here is pretty close to right on. It's just a little bit out, but that's pretty close. I'm gonna say that's perfect. Probably better than the factory did. Still right on 18. So now with this tacked in place, to make sure it's exactly square, I'm going to use this rope from a common point on this rear end, which is this bolt hole. And I'll measure diagonally to the end of the square tubing, and I'll just make a mark with my pen. Then I'll go to the other side and attach the rope to the common hole on the other side, and then stretch it out to the end of the opposite frame rail. And as you can see, we're right on the mark, so we are exactly square. Double check to make sure we're 8 inches off the ground and we're at 18 degrees, and check to make sure we're square, and I'll start welding it in place. So now I've got a few tacks on here. I'm going to check again to make sure we're level all the way across. Double check we're at 18 degrees, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. So now before I weld this in, I need to hack off the rear part of the frame and the floor of the body so I can lower the body down over the frame. I've got my buddy Cody over here to help out. I think we're hanging up on the frame rail over there. There you go, look at there. Woohoo! Yay! It's gonna be even lower than that. Aha! Now I know the front end is sitting a little high because I haven't pinched it in yet. This is just to check the rear end. With the rear wheels where they need to be in the wheel well, you can see I've got plenty of the rear end cut off, and I've actually got a little bit of room to play with. And the down part of the Z is right where it needs to be. The seat has plenty of room to come back even farther. So now that I'm sure it's going to work, now I can weld it all in place.
Welcome to the show. I'll take your tickets over here. This is your
So using this cardboard template, I can mark out where I need to cut it and transfer it over to make the exact shape I want for the plate I'm going to use to box it in. When you're boxing frames like this, you don't want to have two seams on either side going in the same spot, because that creates a weak point. And if you remember, the outside seam is right along here going in this direction. So I'm going to make this plate so the seam is over here going in this direction. And then down on the bottom, this plate's going to extend all the way to the bottom of the frame rails to tie both pieces together, making it super solid. And on the underside down here, I left it a little short to leave a gap, and that's going to allow for good welding penetration. I'm also going to use some of the old frame rail that I hacked up and weld in some of these cross braces inside of the box frame. Triangles are the strongest shape, so by making triangles inside of this section, it's going to be way stronger than I'll ever need it to be. But I like to overdo things, that way when I put my 1,000 horsepower Cummins diesel motor in this, I know it's going to hold. These don't need to be welded all the way. You can just stitch weld these. And as you can see, I've got about 1.5 inches weld spaced apart, staggered, and then I'll box it in with the plate I made. It's a tight fit, but that's what you want to get good welds.
There must be some way out of
You want to go no more than like 1 inch at a time and slowly take your time to work your way around. That way you don't overheat it and warp this thing. So now I made another cardboard template so I can box in the back half of the frame. And I'm going to add these 1/4 inch plate gussets just to add a little bit more support. So if you remember, the seam for this down part was right about here. And so I'm gonna cut a plate to cover that seam and tie in the two pieces together. I'll trace it out and then cut it and clean it, and I'll do the same thing on the bottom so I don't have two seams in the same place. Check this out, I thought this was crazy. So I was grinding away at all the paint and everything on here, and I come across these markings right here. Down here on the bottom you see it says PP 1/05/1988. Well, PP means it's a four-wheel drive. And then this is the date that this frame was manufactured. My birthday is January 5th. Isn't that crazy? This frame was built on my birthday. I don't know, I thought that was crazy. This thing is so meant to be. All right, I got this top plate welded in. So I'm gonna let this thing completely cool before I take these clamps off of here as well, just so there's no chance of any kind of warping going on. And then I'll do the bottom plate. And here it is. The rear Z is finished. It's all ground down, plated, boxed, gusseted, ready for 1,000 horsepower. Whew, that was a lot of work. But now it's time to move on to the front end.